Well, good morning, good evening, good afternoon, depending on where you're at in the world, and welcome to another Altero and Hornet Security sponsored webinar. This one on your 5 most critical M365 vulnerabilities revealed and how to fix them. My name is Andy Surwich, technical evangelist with Hornet Security, and with me I've got Fabio and Hussein. How's it going, guys?
Hi, all good. How are you?
Good. Hey, we're excited about the content today, guys. It's good to have you. I know you got a lot of great content for us today, so I'm just going to kind of dive right in and get us going here. So first thing I want to cover is real quick, just kind of the agenda for today. We're going to do some introductions, myself, Hussein, Fabio. We're going to introduce Hornet Security, the sponsor of today's webinar. And then we're going to get to what you're here to listen about today, and that is, the threat landscape, kind of where things lie today. And then the guys are going to take you through, again, those 5, critical M365 security areas, credential phishing, AD sync and hybrid environments, MFA settings, and whether they're insufficiently set up or if they're incorrect, malicious app registrations, business email compromise attacks, and so on and so forth. So lots of great content. And at the end, we've got some wrap up and Q&A. Now, real quick thing about the Q&A. If you have any questions, feel free to throw questions into the questions form in GoToWebinar as we step through the content today. If we can kind of organically stop and address any of the questions as we're stepping through the content, we certainly will. Otherwise, there is a Q&A section at the end of the webinar, and we'll answer as many questions as we can. Outside of that, we always do some sort of follow-up blog post or piece of content that contains a full list of the questions and their associated answers. So if you ask a question today that doesn't get answered, keep on the lookout for that. We'll be sure to get your question answered in some way, shape, or form. Now, on top of that, this session is being recorded today, and you will get a copy of the slide deck as well. Excuse me. So some real quick introductions. Again, my name is Andy Surwich. I'm a technical evangelist with Hornet Security, and I'm a Microsoft MVP and VMware vExpert. Been in the industry for 20 years now. Just the only difference between then and now is I have a few more gray hairs and a few more pounds around my waistline. So I'm just really kind of acting as the host, your MC today, and we've got, again, Hussein and Fabio here that are going to be taking you through the bulk of the content. Guys, I'm going to pass it over to you to let you do your own introductions. So take it away.
Thank you. My name is Hussein Shakarti. I've been with TrueSec ever since the company started here in Sweden. So my role is a cybersecurity advisor. Been working with cybersecurity and IT security in all its forms and shapes since the early 90s, basically. So focusing a lot on acting as second line, third line support for our incident response team, our pen testers, red teamers, etc.
Yeah, we call Assign the Wolf. If you think Pulp Fiction as the reference, when you got trouble, you call in the Wolf. He's the type of guy we call in whenever we have any type of problem. So, yeah, I'm Fabio. I'm a technical lead or security team leader here at TrueSec. I work a lot today with like incident response and threat intelligence, forensics, investigation, and that type of stuff. But I've done red teaming and security assessments for many years before that. So yeah, a little bit of both the offensive side of security and the defensive and detection, protection. And I work closer with our SOC for like threat monitoring, detection, and quick response. Yeah.
Very good. Thanks, guys. Real quick mention about the sponsor of today's webinar, again, Hornet Security. So Altero, we are part of the Hornet Security group now. And when it comes to Hornet Security, Hornet Security is really kind of the most comprehensive cloud security service for M365, containing, spam filtering, advanced email security, encryption, continuity and archiving, signatures and disclaimers, and backup and recovery as well, kind of the whole package there. Additionally, we provide options as well for, on-premises Microsoft Exchange, Google Apps, and other email services. And then also provide hosted mailboxes with full security, web security, and backup and recovery for VMware and Hyper-V as well. So kind of the whole package, right? So that's kind of who we are in a nutshell. Just kind of give you an idea of the the scope of the company itself. We are international, so we've got data centers all over the world. We've got 17 offices all over the world. So we're kind of all over the place and have resources in you know, a lot of the major countries in the world. And then in terms of growth, Hornet Security has seen some tremendous growth over the last you know, really 13 years here. And starting back in, you know, 2008, and then kind of coming up into present day. You know, we started with the launch of archiving, email encryption, and more recently, the company's been making a lot of strategic acquisitions, you know, such as Altero, bring us into the Hornet Security Group to kind of round out the product portfolio and really, you know, allow customers to do what it is they do, you know, without having to worry so much about email security and backup and recovery services. So with that, let's get to the content. So let's talk about the threat landscape. And the first thing we're going to start with is just a quick poll. So we always like to start with a poll here just because it kind of, you know, gives the presenters a little bit of a level set of where the audience currently is. So I'm going to go ahead and launch a poll here. You know, what are your biggest concerns with security today in M365? So I should see a poll up on the screen. And yeah, go ahead and fill it in. I mean, we've got all the typical stuff that you're probably used to seeing when it comes to security conversations here. We've got ransomware, we've got phishing, credential theft, malicious applications, governance, and monitoring. Now, guys, one thing I like to try and do here is try to make a prediction as to how I think this poll is going to work out. And if I had to guess, my guess would be most attendees are probably going to select ransomware as the main concern. What do you guys think?
I think so as well. Then it depends also. I mean, ransomware is something you're easily scared of, right? Because you hear so much about it in the news, and there is so much, and obviously the impact is huge. Then if you look at the like daily life, so to speak, then it's probably phishing is what you see almost every day, right?
Right. Absolutely. All right, so let's go ahead and close that poll here. We've given people a minute. And it turns out, Fabio, you were right. Phishing is actually the #1 concern, with ransomware as a number 2nd and credential theft as a close 3rd. So again, thanks all for participating in that. Again, that kind of helps our speakers kind of know, you know, what your big concerns are, and we can kind of tailor the content a little bit based on that. So with that, I think we are to your guys' content here real quick, guys. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and pass out presenter control to you guys. And you should get a prompt there, Fabio, and you can take it away from there.
So let's start with like a general threat landscape. And we do this to kind of put things in perspective and give a bit more context, right? So, because we're going to talk a lot about Microsoft 365, how the threat actors use the different services or misuse, and yeah, how things are connected within that world. But, you know, this is a bit of a bigger picture because that's only a small part of it, really. The data you see here on the screen is taken from incidents that we've actively worked with during the year 2020. And the attack types, well, it's basically like what type of attack, obviously, and I'm going to describe a couple of them, while the vectors are the initial vector or the attack vector for initial access, right? So how they got a foothold in the environment in the first place, regardless of what type of attack it was. So we got about half that is ransom, right? So I mean, ransomware, obviously, but ransomware is not the only mean of getting ransom or, you know, to do a ransom type of attack. There is a lot of data leak, victims being threatened.
We have I mean, like denial of service type of attacks, everything ranging from network-based denial of service and other type of denial of services as well.
Yeah. So a lot of the ransom is obviously a huge part of this, and another fairly big chunk, 70% of business email compromise. That's where those are the so-called CFO scams or CEO scams, right? So some email account gets compromised, and then they send email to some other employee saying, hey, you need to transfer money here. Or maybe they hijack a conversation where there is already an ongoing discussion about a payment, an invoice, or anything like that. And then at the last minute, they say, oh, wait, just use this bank account instead. So that's technically less sophisticated, but it is very effective, and we see this a lot. And then, yeah, other types, obviously, but those are the big ones. And access harvesting actually is also pretty big, with 21%. Those are more large campaigns just to get access. It can be to accounts, it can be to computers infected with malware. Those are usually sold. So access sale is actually a huge thing now on the dark web. And then this type of access can be bought and reused for other types of attacks by different actors. And if you look at how they get in the first place, there is a lot of phishing, obviously, which is also very connected to what we're going to talk about today. Then, yeah, the other part is basically attacking stuff that is exposed to the internet, whether it's a remote login of any type, whatever, like RDP, Citrix, a VPN of any sort, something that gives you remote access as a functionality. So using a compromised account or guest or brute forced or sprayed or whatever. Or it can be a vulnerability in something you expose, like there was like the Pulse VPN, for example, FortiGate VPNs, all kinds of VPNs.
We actually had a very good share of vulnerability-based things this year. I mean, look at the Exchange, at the Pulse VPN, etc. All of these.
Right, 2021 is definitely a big one in vulnerability exploit. It was 28% last year from the numbers here.
Exactly.
So it's gonna be a big chunk this year as well. So in terms of Microsoft 365, how are the different M365 services and functions connected to, or how are they using as part of attacks?
Exactly.
What can they use them for?
This is both going to be about what kind of target the threat actors does have, and what kind of use cases they actually create for the Office 365 platform. So sometimes they want to target that, like, okay, stealing the credentials, harvesting credentials, guessing password, etc. And then some other times they're just about to create a stepstone. They need to get hold of an account to get hold of another account, right? Because of a trust relationship or something like that. There can be a vendor partner relation and so on. So for any reason, any of the things listed on the screen here, it could be the final target, or it could be something, an intermediary target, a step in between.
Right. I mean, business email compromise, we kind of talked about. It's both the vector and the attack itself in a way, because you take over a mailbox, but then you stay within the mailbox context to launch the attack. And also the other way around, kind of going from an on-prem environment to cloud services. We see this a lot, especially when it comes to like larger ransomware campaigns, where at first they take over the on-prem infrastructure, and then what they do before deploying the actual ransomware, they do two main things. They actually three, I guess. One is to do data discovery as much as they can to steal data that they can use to threaten the victim to leak the information as an additional pressure to get paid. And then they do they look for backups, and they make sure they destroy those backups if they are online and reachable. And they look for central management of security software, like AVs or whatever is in place, so they can disable that centrally in the entire environment before deploying the ransomware, to make sure that the encryption process is not disturbed.
And partially, it's a lot easier to find corporate-related information nowadays in the cloud-based services, like just doing searches using APIs rather than having to go through all the files on the file server, right?
Right.
That's a lot easier to find interesting pieces of data.
Yeah. So normally from on-prem, you get a hold of who are the admins, and then go there and then find their credentials for the mailboxes in Office 365, for example, and log on to those from the on-prem environment, and find information about whatever solution they have, credentials for them, and so on. So if we take the first point, credentials phishing.
I guess we're not going to live demo phishing, right?
No.
We have some screenshots about things.
I mean, phishing is phishing, and yes, there are many variations of it, but still, it's phishing, and I'm pretty sure everyone has seen phishing emails before. I mean,
at least I've got some, and maybe some of you have interestingly followed some of the links in there, and then just out of curiosity, nothing else.
Right. So I mean, this is the typical one, right? You get an email, and there is an attachment. This in its HTML file in this case. It's a PDF file in this other case. There's probably going to be a link inside there. It's going to bring you to some landing page where you're going to try to get your credentials.
And this is most often not related to any vulnerabilities in your web browser, the HTML viewer or the PDF viewer or whatever you have. It is just to have it looking pretty, to having looking the way you as a user will perceive this as, oh, okay, this looks legitimate, I can trust this and click at that link.
All right. So you see a lot of red text here because we just anonymize certain information. This is taken from cases we looked into. But here's an example of using a compromised SharePoint site to host malware, or to host some kind of middle stage for redirecting the victim to the actual landing page, or to malware.
Exactly.
Which makes it a bit more difficult to detect, right? Because really the only thing you have in the body is a link to SharePoint, like the actual real SharePoint online. So yeah, there needs to be more contextual information, right, to detect this as malicious. Then you could end up into whatever type of landing page. We have many examples here. I'm sure you've seen something like this. This is likely a compromised WordPress site where they host an HTML page that looks like the Office 365 logon page, and they harvest credentials.
And I guess it's only the trained eyes and then the trained users will be observing what's going on the address bar, right? The regular users will probably not look that direction at all.
Well, this is why this is successful, right? And I mean, another example here, hosting on OneDrive, different variations. I'm not even going to go through this. I mean, you would get normally some kind of failed message like this, and that's too late because you entered your password already. It's kind of funny when we actually see, sometimes we get a hold of that type of information and know what the threat actor actually had access to in terms of collected credentials, and you see that users they get this message and then they try another password because it didn't work. It's like, wait, maybe I had my other password for this account, and then they just give out more credentials. We do it actually. We see it a lot when we do red teams ourselves. We set this up and we see what type of stuff we collect. This is interesting as well. This is a tool that automates the whole process of relaying MFA for a phishing site. So how do you phish a user if they have MFA? Well, you just act like the same way that the MFA protected provider does, right? So you have a site and the user tries to log on. So it gives away their credentials. You take them and on the fly, you log on to the actual service, the Office 365. If you get a prompt for MFA, you will just forward that back to the user. And if they have to get a code from their phone or if they have to just accept a pop-up notification, doesn't matter. If they are they think they're logging in somewhere, right? So they expect the MFA and they will just go through with it. Then you are actually logged on to the real service.
And then this is a very easy, easy for the threat actor to map this already in advance and then make their reconnaissance. They exactly know what kind of flow is expected. So they can tune their tooling to just suit that need.
Yes. And as a final example, of course, you can have attachments with malware in it, right? So it's not just about stealing credentials. You can send malware. This particular example is in the picture was an attack we investigated last year. It was an Emotet payload here. So the Emotet malware was in that attachment, and this was the start of a large ransomware campaign that ended up, a pretty massive attack for that organization. Yes, well, which it was a micro-enabled document, and it's also interesting that they did come from a compromised account that the victim had recently talked to, so they attached themselves to an existing thread. So you would receive an email with the malware attachment from a person that you recently had an email conversation with.
Exactly. That simply adds more trustworthiness to that email conversation and makes the user more willing to click the link and follow the instructions.
Yes. So let's talk about
what can we do about this.
Yes.
Well, obviously, the single factor type of credentials are problematic. So we need to put something else in there or add a bit more strength. So adding MFA, multi-factor authentication is obviously a good idea. Although we know that the threat actors are actually evolving their techniques and their tactics as well. So they do have methodology to cope with that as well. Okay, they know that there will be an MFA, so they will just sit there and wait until the user accepts the MFA prompt or something like that. And then they will be targeting something else, not the credential itself, but maybe other artifacts involved in the authentication process.
Right, and we're going to see an example.
We're going to see some of that. So, but putting all this together, if you have the licensing level and so on, using conditional access is recommended, highly recommended in there. If not, then using the so-called security standards or security defaults in the Office 365, that would be your options to go. With the conditional access, you will have a very nice fluent possibility to like make those really fine-tuned decisions. Okay, you're in the office, you're choosing a trusted device or something like that, and therefore we skip the MFA prompt for you, or you're allowed to access this only if you are at our office network, or only if you're using one of the trusted devices, and so on. So we can fine-tune this in many, many different ways.
Right.
On top of that, we need to still rely on proper detection, proper monitoring, and maybe some automatic actions. That's where the other guys fits in, the identity protection component with the actionable settings in them. And then we have the auditing and monitoring solutions, or basically looking at the logs generated by the different subsystems, including the identity protection risky events. So risky users and risky sign-in categories to be looked at.
That's right. So I think the important thing is, I mean, there are different angles we can work on this, right? But I think the trick here is to find the right trade-off between the different setups based on your organization. And there can be some challenges. I mean, especially like for global corporation with users logging in from all over the world, or maybe, for some reason there needs to be shared accounts, depending how people work, or there can be maybe third parties that need to access in a certain way from different place that the users normally do. So there can be challenges that make all these conditional policies a bit more tricky to define. But I think finding the right balance between how much you want to protect in terms of hardening, pure hardening, like requirements for logging on and from where and so on, combined with the conditions to make the life of the users better. And then still assuming that things will go wrong. Some credentials will leak, some users will get phished. So you need to be able to detect that. And then you can work with a lot of stuff that is already in the platform, risk events like you talked about, and then actionable things.
We will see some of that as we progress as well.
Yeah, and I think we can maybe kind of show quickly. We talked about conditional access.
Exactly.
Which is quite interesting in terms of stuff you can do with it. So we have one call here, MFA policy.
And then once again, MFA stands for multi-factor authentication. That's in versus single-factor authentication. So username password is supposedly a single-factor authentication.
Yes. So we got some conditions here we can set up. This will basically define in which conditions do I have to prompt a user for additional factors, so my second factor.
And we can put together a policy that requires multiple conditions to be fulfilled. I mean, multiple maybe authentication factors or other factors, like you have to use this kind of app, this kind of client, you have to be in this location, and then after that, we still maybe require MFA for you to pass this to the next step.
Right.
Okay.
So yeah, and we talked about risky users, right?
Exactly. So just show.
So
the risky user detection and the risky activity detection is part of the so-called identity protection components in Azure Active Directory, which is a premium feature. So this keeps an eye monitoring what's going on. If we have like the deviation from type of standard track for this user in terms of new sign-in artifacts or attributes, like you change your location, you change your browser, you change your tooling or client, etc. So it will react on these different levels, and then will give us some actionable choices if we want to, so we can set the policy with actions on it.
Right. And here are some examples of risks that are detected. There is this particular account called Backup SBC, and there has been some logons earlier today from the US, from Germany, and also these are categorized as anonymous IP addresses, which means like it could be a Tor exit node or a VPN or whatever that is, some kind of anonymizing service.
Yeah.
So also you may have, you must have noticed that this account is named in a certain way that a user is normally not named. Backup service, which brings us to the next point, right?
Exactly. So I mean, most of the customers today, most of organizations using these kind of cloud services are synchronizing user information. Usually starts on-prem, although there are some organizations that are born cloud native. The majority are still originating from an on-prem solution into the cloud. So we've seen in some cases, maybe one too many cases, right? That somebody has just clicked through that setup wizard and then selected, okay, just synchronize everything in my Active Directory to Azure AD, which will include service accounts, other accounts. Then maybe these accounts should only remain in the on-prem environment, right? By doing that synchronization, you're actually exposing those accounts to the wide global internet, so everybody could actually start talking to Azure AD and say, hey, what about this service account? Can I guess that password? And guess what? If the password was set like for 10 years ago.
Yeah, or maybe like 25 years ago when you set up your on-prem AD and you had that SQL service account with the password you set just for the initial stuff 25 years
ago. And
ago.
nobody dares to change it when it's in production mode, right?
Yeah, no, and now suddenly it's in Office 365 and anyone in the world can guess the password for it. So it's a whole different type of exposure, and we see that a lot being the actual reason for having the first foothold.
Exactly. So I mean, basically, keeping some things on the ground, keeping some things on-prem, basically speaking, they are not suitable to be like shifted towards the cloud. And then on the opposite side of the thing is that why would we need to manage cloud with an account that is originally created on-prem, right? So there are two sides of this coin. Both the exposure we're creating by synchronizing unnecessary accounts to the cloud services, and then if we start managing the cloud services with synchronized accounts, then there is a potential jump from the on-prem. So if somebody managed to get hold of an on-prem situation, then they can straight away jump to the cloud service. And we don't neither of that to be possible, basically. Other sites we've noticed that maybe some organizations are not taking enough care of their Active Directory or Azure Active Directory synchronization, the server itself, the accounts related to that, and so on, because you should really treat that component as one of your domain controllers. It does have that power, especially if you're synchronizing your passwords. It does actually have the power to read your user hashes, the encrypted password version, right? So we need really to care, give it decent amount of care. This thing is also able to create objects in Azure Active Directory, so that's another reason why it should be handled with great amount of care.
Yes. So just to show an example of how you would actually exploit something like that, I have a simple script here that would take a list of email addresses, which email addresses are obviously not secret, right? And just go through that list and try to log on with password. That's what we would call a password spray, right? You take a list of users and you try maybe one or maybe two passwords per log on per user. So instead of just taking one user and try a million passwords,
which will eventually trigger a lookout action.
Yeah, I could trigger.
So this is a bit safer in terms we're not maybe drawing that much of attention. We're not locking accounts unnecessarily and so on.
Right. Plus, we have a lot more chances to find. I mean, if you imagine, maybe you pick a user with a strong password, not an extremely weak password, and you put your focus on there. It's gonna, it's never gonna lead anywhere. But if you have a large list of users, there's probably gonna be at least one with a simple password.
Yeah.
I mean, statistically speaking, right? So if you try that weak password on all of them, you have a lot better chances to find one.
So you mean like summer 2021?
That's probably what I would start with right now at this time of year.
Yeah.
Or summer 21, for shorter policies. Capital S. But another very common thing is, choosing the company name and the year or something. Now we're using the Contoso demo tenant, so why not try Contoso 21 for those email addresses? So I'm gonna set it up this way, and I need to go in the right folder, which is that one. So I'm gonna set it up that way. And I'm going to run this loop. And you can see here while it runs that this connects to an endpoint at M365 called EWS. That's the Exchange Web Services. It's actually a legacy protocol. And we're going to get back to that in a little while. But you see, out of those users now, the first 3 failed, and I found one that worked. All right, so this Megan account actually worked, and I could log on with that password. Now, I can obviously do the same with the with that service account as well, right? So I mean, it's not much point improving that now, but
exactly. So
you know, you can guess that password for that backup service or whatever other service account that should have never been exposed to Azure AD.
Yeah, I mean, the way to collect those usernames or proposed usernames or guessing them, I mean, there are maybe other league you could potentially find information about them in other attacks and so on, or just buy that information for that sake.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it's nothing really fancy about a password spraying or brute force or anything like that. But there are a couple of points here because, and here we get to the next point, right? How you actually configure MFA. Because if you remember from before, we had an MFA policy, right?
Yeah.
So how come that we could log on with the username and password?
So if we would look at the details on that policy just quickly. So that policy, we do have a bunch of conditions, right? It applies actually to all users, apparently.
That's what it says here. It says all users included and specific users excluded. So what does that mean? You have a section for include and a section for exclude. So include all users except some specific ones, which in our particular case here is the administrator and the backup service.
The backup service. So if you were hitting the backup service, obviously MFA will not fire.
That's right. So it is not uncommon that there are groups in here that are excluded, and then suddenly someone adds a lot of users to those groups, and then suddenly you have hundreds of users that for some reason are excluded by the
somebody ends up with trouble with MFA, and they got like, okay, we can add them to this group, and then they forget about we should clean up that group, we should really revise it.
It also happens that groups end up here
with nested membership. And
yeah, and especially, I mean, a case I've seen several times, you have a group here that for some reason someone added that, and maybe you had just 1 or 2 people in there at the beginning, but the group name is not like excluded from MFA. The group name is maybe, I don't know, application XYZ.
Yeah.
And then people just add to that group without realizing that they're going to be excluded by MFA. So reviewing these, if you already have set them up, is I think it's good advice.
And then we have other conditions like which application is this going to trigger on. So in this case, we can add exclusions in here as well.
And those would be like, you know, Exchange Online or SharePoint Online or all the integrated applications.
Exactly. And then further on, we have other more detailed conditions like the location, as we were talking about that, the particular device platform, etc. You can actually start incorporating the user risk and sign-in risk. And here it says if a user add a risk, we would not tolerate that, and we would not allow the access, for instance. So this is something we can work with. And then finally, there is a discussion about what client apps. This is on the client side of the thing. So whether you're using a full-blown installed desktop application or web browser or something like that. And that's where most of the trouble starts to appear.
Yeah, right, because the Megan user that we just successfully password sprayed was not in that exclusion list, right? It was the backup account and the admin, but not the Megan account. So the reason that worked is because of this configuration here. The client applications, they're set to modern authentication clients, which are the ones that do support MFA.
Exactly. And this is an active exclusion of any other application that potentially doesn't support MFA.
Right. So the legacy authentication clients.
Yeah.
And legacy authentication clients that use legacy protocols like EWS or the Exchange Web Services,
or SMTP or POP3 or IMAP or so there are a bunch of protocols that is still possible to use, although they are not fulfilling our most recent requirement in terms of MFA and so on.
Right. I also think it's interesting they call it modern authentication clients. For now, I
Mhm.
mean, they're modern now. We're gonna be old soon, but
And if we would look in the audit trails and the sign-in logs, we would basically see the same thing when why this MFA policy didn't actually trigger,
right.
because there was a mismatch on the application type, and there you can actually do pretty good searches for what type of applications that was used and so on.
Yeah, that's actually pretty good to maybe look at.
Yeah. So I mean, we have a question like, can you recommend any MFA policies, any setup and specific one? We need first to understand our posture, our exposure. What kind of applications are we using? What kind of protocols are we using? Relying heavily on legacy authentication protocols? Do we need to change user behavior? I mean, maybe you need to change clients, et cetera, et cetera. Once that is done, then it's an easier story to start compiling the policies, and probably need one or a few exceptions.
Right.
Because you probably have some remote services relying on using these legacy authentication for legit reasons. Like we have an application that needs to send email on behalf of our users, maybe for marketing or something like that. So that usually use SMTP, although it's authenticated. It's still a legacy auth.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah. So yeah. Exactly. And yeah, I did find an example of that log. So you see, this was a log on from the Megan account, and it was a single factor authentication. And if you look into that and you go under conditional access, you see that the MFA policy was not applied. And you can go in here and see why was it not applied. Well, the user, yes, it matched. The application, it matched, but the client app, so the Exchange Web Service, did not match. So the requirement for MFA was not
Exactly.
set for this logon. Okay, I want to show quickly another cool thing you can do with Exchange Web Services since we're on it.
Some of these protocols are really interesting.
Yeah, well, to be honest, not specifically about Exchange Web Services, but what can you do when you have access to a mailbox? Because if you think of the other attacks that we talked about before, not everything is about stealing credentials. A lot is about taking control of the computers, right? So then you would have to send the user malware, and hopefully from the threat actor perspective, the user would download it and run it, and then you would compromise the computer and do whatever you need to do from there. When you already have credentials for accessing a mailbox over up to 35, for example, a trick to do that, I mean, you could use that access to send an email to like another employee, right? So it would still be much better than an email coming from the outside.
Exactly.
So it's more trustworthy. But we can do something even better with this little script here. Here we're just using the the Microsoft libraries for Exchange Web Services. We're setting it up with the credentials we have, so user and password and the endpoint. We can just verify that the credentials work. Yes, they do, like we verified before. Here you can basically query, whatever you want, like get me all the folders in the mailbox for this user. Then yes, these are all the folders for that particular user. You can get the whole global address list and so on. You can get all the emails. A cool thing you can do here, and I'm gonna log out here. I'm gonna log on as Megan. Yeah, I remember the username, but never the tenant. So. So I do have a logon prompt. Oh, sorry, an MFA prompt.
Yeah, as you see there, the MFA policy is actually kicking in there, or the conditional access policy, rather said.
Because I'm using a modern client app, which is my browser, which does support MFA.
And this is very, I don't know if I address it as sad or funny. When you ask the customer, do you use MFA? Yes, we do. Do you use MFA for everything? Yes, we do. And then you end up in they are using the modern authentication client, but then they still have the legacy authentication enabled.
Right. So one thing I can do is that I can, instead of sending an email, I can create an email, because now I have access to this mailbox. It's my own mailbox as Megan, right? What if I create an email But instead of sending that, I save it as draft, but then I move it to inbox, and then I flag it so it's not a draft.
Yeah.
Even though that's
evil.
Yeah. So what does that mean really? I create an object right in my mailbox. I put it where I want. I name it what I want. I give it properties I want. I can even give it attachments.
And
so
then
I have a file
it will actually just pop up in the inbox. It says, hey, you just received an email. And I mean, users will not, the first thing they do, they will go and check the headers, right?
Right, let's check that. Let's see how it looks like. I can literally choose whatever as a from address because I'm creating this email in my own mailbox. I can write whatever. I can write that I'm Andy. Yeah, domain doesn't matter. This could be just text, or just a string, whatever. To and the body, I can specify the HTML. Just going to be a hello, and I can attach a file. I have a local file here on my computer. Just whatever, zip file. And I want to save it in inbox. And behind the scenes, this function will also use a kind of an undocumented way of setting that to not draft. Since it's not sent, you're not supposed to be able to do that using this API, but you can just change the right little flag. So let's run it. So done. If I go back to my mailbox, I have an email from Andy that says readme. This one has an attachment, which was just uploaded to my own mailbox. This will bypass any type of attachment filter solution. So it's it's a really nice trick. It does, of course, require that you have access to a mailbox. Yeah. So we should have presented this much earlier. It's just a nice trick from an attacker perspective. And if you go and look into this, if you check the headers, well, there are no headers.
Yeah, this has effectively not been routed in the system anywhere. It's just created in that inbox or in that mailbox, rather said. It may be, I mean, this will maybe trigger something in the long term, but not immediately. Right. So as you're just creating it, it will not, there is no trigger because there are no routing events connected to it.
Right. You just need the user to kind of think that they just received an email that they trust, because you can put whatever sender you want. You create your own little scenario.
Yeah.
So basically, the issue again in this particular case was the legacy, right? The legacy authentication. And we already covered that part, really.
Yeah, I mean, let's put it this way: even if we would have covered the legacy authentication and blocked it, disable it, you can actually disable the legacy authentication both in the Office 365 space, so you can, per Office 365 settings, disable all legacy authentication. You can do it partially per user, so you can tell which protocols are enabled for different users in the Office 365, and then you can actually do it using the conditional access policy to say, hey, if this is a combination of a client and a protocol, this and this and that way, so this is a legacy authentication scenario, then we will not allow the access, and we probably need to have some exceptions for some legitimately allowed legacy authentication scenarios, right? So even if we would have done all of this, given we talked about phishing initially, right? The demo you just gave is actually still possible if you steal the token.
Right. What does it mean stealing the token, though?
Yeah.
So the thing is, everything or almost everything we talked about so far is about the authentication, right? So how do you provide that you are yourself or you are a legitimate user with access to the system, and so the system can recognize you, whether with single, multi-factor, or whatever. Once that's done, then you will have some kind of valid session.
Yeah.
Right.
So Azure AD will generate something called a token, access token. It's a ticket. It's a ticketing system. So it's a statement that says, yes, the user Megan has signed in, fulfilling these requirements, and here is a proof of that. And then you can show that proof to the targeted application. The application should let you in.
Right. So what if I receive an email like this? Say, hey, you have a bonus or whatever. This can come from whatever. It's a link to something called fisher365.azurewebsites.net. Now, maybe you wouldn't use that name in an actual attack, but we did like the name when we created it, so we kind of kept it.
Just to be clear about the messaging.
Right. So what happens if I click on this? I will end up somewhere that is an application that, see here, it's trying to redirect me back to the actual Office 365 logon page, and then it prompts, or my own tenant actually prompts me, do you want to get access, or do you want to grant access to this application to do the following things?
So let's put this a bit more details on it. This application is hosted on its own Azure AD tenant. So this is an Azure AD hosted app. It's not in the user tenant. Okay, so
Exactly.
it's a different separate tenant. This one is saying anybody with a valid Azure AD credential can access this application. That's why it was verifying your credentials. Because it's a federated setup, it will push you back to your original tenant. Your original tenant will say, yes, the user Megan is logged on successfully, so I'm happy with that, and that satisfies our requirements, and then push back to the application. Now, at this stage, this application it's not happy with just having a user signing in. This is actually stepping up the game and saying, oh, but I do have some extended permission requirements. I want to do the following. So these are
in the user tenant, in the user context.
Exactly. So when you consent to this prompt, when you accept the statement here, you're actually giving the application or accepting a delegation model. So you're telling your Azure AD that, hey, this application can act on behalf of me as a user. In some cases, only interactively, only when I've accessed the application initially. And in some other cases, depending on the permissions requested, it can actually act on behalf of me in an offline mode. So I don't need to be interactive with the app for the app to be able to impersonate me as a user.
Exactly, and that's actually a permission we're requesting here.
So
maintain access to data you have given it access to.
Exactly.
So that means, yeah, like you said, you don't need to be logged on to the application to be able to.
So this is non-interactive / offline access.
Right. You see here, this is the attacker side of things. So other than hosting the application, the attacker also has this little script in this example that will be able to fetch tokens that have been stolen from clients. And I have this little function called get fish 365 tokens, which I just ran and didn't get anything, so I don't have anything. But as soon as Megan clicks accept, my application will be able to request a token because the user has given it permission to. So when this is done and I get redirected back to Office, because that's just the flow that our application does, just redirect them back. And I run this function again. Now I have a valid token for this user. It's been issued just now. Well, if I grab it and I put it a bit more nicely in my clipboard, and then I put it in a token, right? So this will be the full token that Megan has, or the application has to impersonate Megan specifically. And I set it in the headers. I can actually just use REST calls to, for example, the Graph API and query, for example, for the /me endpoint, which will get information about Megan in Megan's tenant. Saying for getting the list of users in Megan's tenant, because Megan has access to do that. Megan can view all the users in that tenant, right? So this is another way of getting access to a victim's mailbox. And remember, this was behind an MFA logon. So this has nothing to do with how Megan was authenticated.
No,
she was already authenticated.
And we're not bothering about tricking the user to give us his or her permission credentials or MFA credentials or anything of that. We're just interested in making sure the authentication is fully accomplished or fully finished, and then writing on top of that by requesting the permissions to be acting on behalf of the user. So it's opting into the delegation model that is allowed by Azure Active Directory.
Right.
So the access token we just got in the name of that user, I mean, right now we have the permission to act as in offline mode, right? So we don't even need the user to get interactive, but the access token is actually valid for 1 hour by default. So just remember that at once. So if anybody eventually ends up with an access token from any of your sessions, they will be able to run for free for 1 hour, right?
That's right.
So we can see that, right?
We can see that. I was actually going to show in the little time we have left how you can prevent users from granting access to untrusted applications, because really that's what I think you should really do.
Exactly.
Because I mean, users shouldn't have that power.
In our enterprise apps, right?
In enterprise apps, yes. You have consent and permissions. These are settings, right? So this is my default. Allow user consent for apps. So any app, including Fisher 365. Or you can set it to only allow it for verified publishers for only some permissions that you can select, or to not allow it all unless an admin will.
Yeah. So if it is set to the more strict setting, or the most strict setting of this, the user will be ending up on a like deny sort of thing prompt, but it says, hey, you can file this to an admin for an admin to review this and accept the consent. So there will be an admin-based consent rather than the user-based consent for that, which is really recommended. I mean, if you have a model that you can trust other Azure Active Directory tenants, other published or publishers in that terminology, and then the second choice will be the one to go for. Great. And then in terms of if we already have that, so we have some people already gave consent, you can go in the same location, basically look at your enterprise apps, and you can start seeing what kind of consent or what kind of delegation the users have been accepting.
Right. You can go through the applications. You have the Fisher 365 here, and you can see what permissions.
And for who.
And for whom, exactly. It's going to be just under permissions. You see that there is no admin consent, there is only user consent. And for one user, there are all these permissions set, and you can see which user has granted which permission to this application. And to get rid of it, well, you can go in here and just delete the application from the tenant. Then
so that will revoke, exactly.
Yeah.
So this revokes the application's delegation.
Right.
Still, if somebody still have that access token, they can still play with it for 1 hour.
Exactly. Yes.
At the worst case.
Yeah. So let me just quickly skim through the last point, which is quite quick, really, and it's not nothing really changes in a business email compromise attack. It's more of some specific things that are done in a business email compromise attack, which is the classic CFO, CEO scam, is that they add forwarding rules to compromise mailboxes. Say like every incoming email that has keywords like invoice or payment, then forward them to an external address. Because then they will review that and they will hijack that conversation and make sure that they enter a different bank account during the process and so on.
So maybe forwarding rules are the more dangerous one, but still we see that if it's not possible to put together forwarding rules, they will go back and start relying on automation rules. That just moves the message away from the user attention and flag it as read, et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
So you need really to start monitoring that space, what's going on there. And then in terms of controls and policies, any anti-phishing or spam solution, et cetera, whether the built-in ones or add-ons, they should be able to control that part as well, the automatic forwarding, either globally by global policy or for specific users.
Right.
And obviously we have, the mail tracing will give us the truth about what exactly happened.
So in terms of, looking it backward, like if you suspect that it was a malicious, or simply if you want to check what emails have gone out from your tenant, then mail tracing is a good way to check that. Especially if you know that, there was a threat actor here, they set up a rule, let's see what actually was forwarded.
Exactly.
Then you can check it that way.
Exactly. Okay.
And I think we're pretty much done for now, Andy.
All right. I am back then. Back to me. So I'm going to leave my webcam off for now. Just the internet is behaving for now, but I'm not going to tempt fate. So you'll just have to listen to my voice instead of watching me as well. So I'm going to go ahead and steal back the presenter status and show my screen. You guys should be able to see the threat monitor screen.
Yes.
All right. So before I go through this real quick for attendees, if you have any questions, we've been getting a lot of great questions. Keep them coming. Go ahead and, again, drop those into the GoToWebinar questions form. And we're going to cover a lot of those in the Q&A section here coming up in just a second. But so what I want to do right now is, we've kind of talked a lot about email security today. And, in terms of, business email compromise attacks, we spent a lot of time talking about phishing. talked about MFA and conditional access. What I wanted to do is talk about a new free tool that's coming out from Hornet Security here in the near future. And what this tool is designed to do is it's really designed to test the permeability of Exchange Online protection. So as you know, if you've managed Office 365 at all, you know that basically every license of Office 365 comes with Exchange Online protection, which has a 99% spam detection rate. Now, you know, Microsoft kind of has a responsibility there to not be overly aggressive, right? Because millions of people use that Exchange Online and Exchange Online protection day in and day out. That, you know, they want to make sure that they're not stopping legit email. But with that said, at 99%, obviously some stuff does make it through. And what this tool is designed to do is it's designed to show you what threats have made it through into user mailboxes and are actively sitting in your user mailboxes today. And the other great thing about this tool, if I put my system administrator hat on, is I don't have to change MX records for this tool. So we actually set up a journaling rule in M365 that allows us to do this monitoring without requiring you to redirect your mail traffic, which I hate changing public DNS records. So if I was an administrator installing this tool, that would be one of my particular favorite things about it. So I'm a firm believer in, let's show and not tell. So I'm going to go ahead and show you Threat Monitor real quick. Let me go ahead and end the show. And first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to show you a quick recorded video where I actually recorded the onboarding process. Again, this is a free app available on iOS and Android, or will be available on iOS and Android shortly, I should say. Not available quite yet. But basically what you do is it's just a very simple onboarding process. I'm going to speed it up a little bit here for the sake of time, but you type in your Office 365 administrator account, and it's going to have you authenticate to your tenant. And basically what we're going to do here first is to kind of let you know what's happening under the hood, kind of give you an idea that, hey, you're going to retain control of your mail traffic. We're just doing this for monitoring purposes. Basically all the fine text, right, is basically what this particular section does. So after you go through that, hit next. We'll speed it up a little bit again. I was already signed in with my admin account for my Andy's Sandwich Shop tenant. So I just went ahead and selected that user, and then you get, again, that typical OAuth, hey, these are the permissions that we need type of prompt. So you can go ahead and read through here and see exactly what the application is going to require in terms of permissions. And then once you're happy with that, hit accept, and it will continue to work you through the wizard here. And so right here on this particular part of the onboarding, so what's happening here is we're actually setting up that journaling rule, like I mentioned earlier. We're setting up that journaling rule. It's going to allow us to monitor the mail. We're to make sure we're authenticated, and then it will drop us into the app and kind of give you what we call the tour. Hey, welcome to Threat Monitor. This is kind of what it does, and it'll step you through the basics of the app. Again, free application designed to monitor and see what threats are making it through Exchange Online protection. So we can scan, we can provide alerts. So, if you want to be alerted when Bob from accounting, the CFO, gets some sort of security threat in his mailbox, you can get a push notification on your phone. You even have the option of deleting emails directly from this app as well. You can get some statistic type views, and you'll also be able to see top targets as well. So with that, what I'm going to do here real quick is I'm going to actually pull up a live version of the app. There we go. All right, so I've got my phone here, and I've got the Threat Monitor app installed here, and I'm on basically the dashboard. Now you can see that I thought I put this on do not disturb mode, but that's okay. Anyway, as you can see here, I don't have a lot of spam coming into this test tenant. Surprisingly, with a test domain and a test tenant, it's surprisingly difficult to spam yourself on purpose. But as you saw on the previous slide, over time, this view, you'd start to get some graphs and you start to see some trends on what type of threats are entering your environment and whether they're moderate, high, or critical in nature. So we can see here in the last 30 days, you see the little dot in the top left-hand corner. We've got one piece of email in here that is questionable inside of the tenant. And if I go to alerts and load it up here, and period last 30 days, you can see that back on 6/2, aserwich@gmail.com sent a piece of email called "Good News from Citibank," and I can go to info and I can get some additional detail on this message. So I see owner communications tells me who was this piece of email sent to. So you see here that it was sent to sirspamsalot@serwichit.com, and the communication partner was aserwich@gmail. So again, I just basically went to my Gmail and started forwarding spam messages from the spam folder is essentially what I did to test this. So the other thing, like I said, is I can actually delete the email right from this view if I want. And that will actually remove it from, again, I'm going to use Bob from accounting. I'm going to pick on that guy again. It would actually remove it from his mailbox. That way he doesn't accidentally interact with it somehow and, create a larger issue. And then again, like I mentioned earlier, you also have the ability to see who the top targets are. So right now, because there's not a lot coming into this particular test environment, good news, right? There's no threats detected. But, if you had a situation where you had a specific user that was, getting hundreds of spam messages a day, now you as the administrator, you can look at these alerts and be like, hey, okay, again, Bob from accounting, he's getting like 300 spam messages a day. Now you can, as the administrator, take some action. Something's going on where he's being targeted, and you can actually do something about it, right? So again, this is kind of just the free tool that's available, again, to help you test the permeability of the Exchange Online protection. And if you need over and above that, so Hornet Security does offer what's called 365 total protection. It's not just monitoring. This is basically the whole shebang. It's full security from end to end, and it includes compliance management on top of that. If you're interested in checking that out, I've got the URL down there again at the bottom of the screen. Don't, like I said, don't try and hurry up and write it down. You will be getting a copy of the slide deck when everything is said and done. So from there, I kind of want to do one more poll here. We always wrap up with a second poll, and mainly what I want to see is what areas of Microsoft 365 security do you want to see more of? What are you interested in learning more about? Instead of just selecting one, you can select all that apply in this particular poll. And what we do with this information is we use it to figure out what are we going to blog about next? What's the next webinar going to be about? What YouTube videos should we start working on? We use this information to again, kind of bring you the information and that content that you guys are looking for. So I'm going to give that just another 10 seconds or so here. Again, select all that apply. You can go ahead and select them all if you want. All right, I'm going to go ahead and close that poll for the sake of time. I want to make sure we have just a few minutes for questions here, and share those results real quick. And that kind of lines up with where I expected it to land. MFA and conditional access are obviously the heavy hitters here. So we'll definitely get some content put together for that, as well as Azure AD and email security options as well. So with that, let's go ahead and talk about two other resources we've got. So we've got the Altero Dojo available for all kinds of other IT content. Right now we have major sections on backup and DR, VMware, Hyper-V, MSP related content. We've got an Office 365 section that will be coming soon. On top of that, we've got a bunch of Azure content that's sitting out there right now underneath the Hyper-V section. But you can see that content at altero.com/dojo if you're interested in that. Additionally, if you're an Office 365 administrator, or maybe you're getting started with Office 365, we have an ebook out there that was written by a good buddy of mine, Paul Schnackenberg. This is the second edition of this book. It's 100+ pages, and it covers a lot of great stuff having to do with the O365 suite. Feature descriptions, installation, best practices. One of my particular favorite things about it, it covers a lot of the differences between the O365 SKUs and the M365 SKUs. It covers all the major components in great detail. So if you want, in the downloads, on the handouts tab right there and go to webinar, you guys should be able to go ahead and grab a copy of that right now if you want. Otherwise, I think we've got a follow-up email going out with that to you as well. And then finally, I think we are to our Q&A. So again, if you haven't gotten your questions in, by all means, go ahead and get those in. And what I wanted to do, guys, real quick, is there were 2 or 3 here that I wanted to circle back to.
Mm.
Let's see. I wanted to look at, there's one that centered around conditional access about halfway through the session. And basically, are there any recommended conditional access policies that you would recommend basically get applied to any tenant that, you know, an administrator would have to manage?
Yeah, certainly there are. So first of all, make sure you have a policy that actually actively prevents or blocks any legacy authentication access. So the condition would be targeting the legacy authentication protocols and explicitly blocking that, disallowing the access. And because you're gonna probably need to do some exceptions on that one and allow some legitimate access in some very few cases, I would say. So that's one of the rules we use to recommend put in there. Another one, obviously, is to require MFA with any condition, with any other conditions. You always require MFA for any admin access. Yeah. And then don't forget to put the break the glass exceptions in there, because the day MFA doesn't work, you still need to get hold of your administration capabilities in your tenant, right?
To fix MFA.
Exactly.
So the other thing I want to add is, depending on your business, you may have users logging on just from one or a few countries. So there is actually no reason to be able to log on from any other place.
So you can do the geofencing as well, the geographic location thingy. So yes, at least require MFA for all other access, explicitly block non-modern authentication protocol flows, and then don't forget that always at any conditions require MFA for your admin access with the break the glass exceptions.
I'm so happy to hear you mention break glass. I'm still surprised even today how many organizations I run into that don't have that break glass account, you know, stored in a safe somewhere, right? I mean, that's fantastic advice. One other interesting question I saw come up earlier centered around utilities, and if you guys had any tools or something you would recommend to help test password strength against known breaches across a given organization, is there anything along those lines that you guys can think of or maybe recommend?
Isn't it a part of the identity protection?
It is. It is actually. Yeah, there is an on-prem Active Directory plugin or component, so you can install that on either on your DCs or on a proxy to your DCs, and every time a password will be set or handled, a hash version of it, or a hash of a hash, an encrypted version of it, will be actually sent for evaluation to a cloud service, the Azure AD. So your password will not be stored there necessarily if you're not synchronizing, but it will be evaluated whether it is a bad, known bad. You can actually set a ban list of like maximum 1,000 words. It could be part of your like products, brands, etc., etc. And then if it is a leaked password, for instance, it will be picked up by that service as well.
But I like that you can set your blacklist yourself, meaning like the name of your company or of your business, or like the city where the headquarters is or something.
Exactly.
Because people would tend to choose that, so you can pre-ban those and combination of those two.
Yeah, so it's part of the identity protection / the password protection feature in Azure AD.
Gotcha. Good to know. I think we got time for one more, and I mentioned to this particular person we'd cover it in the Q&A. So basically, the question kind of centers around the lower level licensing SKUs in M365 and relates to phishing specifically. So if I, maybe I'm an SMB or something along those lines, and I don't have E5. Maybe I don't even have E3. Maybe I'm using something in the business line, right? If I'm trying to stop phishing, are there any particular features in the lower licensing tiers that you can think of that would help with that?
Well, I mean, you can at least start deploying MFA, because MFA is actually available for all tiers, including the free ones. So that's per se would be something that will make it a little bit trickier. Once again, it's not going to make it impossible, but it's going to make it a bit trickier with some user awareness training and so on that will give us better chances to deal with it. Besides that, I mean, we don't really. We can still rely on monitoring. The logs are still there, although you have a limited retention time for the logs, right? With the not the enterprise. Stepping into the enterprise, you will have a 30 days, up to 90 days, and then with the E5 model, you have up to 10 years if you want to in retention time. So then
and lowers at what, 7 days, I think.
The absolute minimum for the basic tiers are 7 days in Azure in Active Directory logs, and then you still have a worth of 30 days in Office. So there are still potential or possibilities that if you keep an eye on that, you can actually still make it. And there is a gentleman agreement, and Microsoft has been using. We're not proposing that this should be a solution, but you have a few E5 or E3 or advanced licensing, right, in your tenants. You will actually benefit from the system will unlock some features, like the identity protection component will be unlocked. So the system will actually monitor everybody, although you only licensed a few people only for that feature. We're not encouraging you to start using this actively to bypass or pay less, but you can get a feeling that you can actually get reasoning that you push back in your organization. Say, hey, we probably need to step this game up a little bit.
Right, makes sense. All right, well, I think we're about 10 minutes over time, so I want to be cognizant of everyone's time and let people get back to their day. But hey, guys, I appreciate you coming out and sharing your knowledge. It's been a great webinar. I know there's been a lot of great interaction in the chat, and appreciate you guys coming out.
Thank you, Andy.
And then with everybody on the line who came to see the webinar, appreciate you coming out. We'll be doing additional webinars here in the future. But yeah, again, we appreciate you stopping out. We'll let you get back to your day. And other than that, have a great one.